Hello. Today, I want to talk about using a neuroscience and attachment informed lens when you're working with children with emotion regulation. And what I found is most of us, when we're working, even with adults, most of us will use an integrated approach, meaning we'll use maybe some cognitive behavioral therapy or we'll use some attachment therapy modalities or frameworks, or we'll use psychodynamic or child centered. And the reason that we do that is we want to make sure to individualize the treatment process for our clients in order to meet the needs of each of our clients. And so most of us have gotten over the years, we'll work on getting different kinds of training to understand things different ways. And through that, we kind of pick up different modalities or theory models. So today, what I want to talk about is creating a framework that we can use an integrated approach when we're working with children, adolescents, and families using play therapy and expressive arts. And what would that look like? And there are some key ingredients to most of the modalities have a lot of similarities. And so when we're thinking about how we want to approach treatment with our clients, we tend to use some of those basic principles across the board. So that's what I want to talk about today. If you're joining me, go ahead and post your name in the comments. Where are you from? What population do you work with? Do you work with children and adolescents? What kind of setting do you work in? So let's see who's here. Go ahead and post that in the comments. If you're watching on the replay, we'd love to hear from you as well. What population do you work with? Ages and all that kind of thing. So today we're going to talk about the CAPES model. So CAPES is an acronym for curiosity, attunement, and authenticity, play, using the therapeutic powers of play, environmental context. So when we're working with children, we want to think about that. And then structuring. Hey, Raina Anna. I was looking at your last name, Rainer. How are you? I'm so glad you joined today. Anna, what population do you work with? I think you said you work with adolescents, and I know you do expressive arts using art, which is amazingly cool. So that's what I want to talk about today. How can this model be useful using an attachment and neuroscience framework to use expressive arts and play therapy? So if you missed last week's episode, go and find it in the replay, because I went over each of the acronyms a little more in depth than I am going to be doing today. So some of the basic principles. Okay, so Anna said children now, but adults earlier. I love using art with children, especially the really sensitive girls. The little elementary school age girls love their art. Boys love art too. I do find that if you get a really sensitive male child, they kind of approach art differently. It's kind of interesting when you see some of how the gender shows up in the play process, and then sometimes you have kids that kind of cross over both ways with that. So it's really interesting. I was just talking to somebody earlier in my supervision group, and because I do an online play therapy and expressive arts supervision group, and we were talking about her elementary age client who's super sensitive, but she loves art and telling stories. And so that has been the magic key to help her deal with a lot of her anxiety. So I love using art. So I am glad you're here. So if you haven't watched before, I'm Kathy Spooner. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and registered play therapist supervisor here in the United States with almost 30 years experience working with children, adolescents, and families in a mental health field. Prior to that, I was a special education teacher for elementary age children with emotional problems. So a lot of that information has served me well working with children and adolescents. And I go live every Wednesday at 7 a.m. Pacific time. So Anna and I are in the same time zone. Um, so every Wednesday, 7 a.m. Pacific, which is 10 a.m. Eastern time, New York. And then I believe this is 3 p.m. UK London time. So I go live in LinkedIn, I go live on YouTube, and I have a Facebook group for mental health professionals using play therapy and expressive arts. I'll go live in there as well. I'll do other things in that group as well. So if you're interested, it's Play and Expressive Arts Therapy Playground. It's my Facebook group. So today, how is the CAPES useful? How can you use a neuroscience and attachment lens with your child and adolescent and family clients in the play therapy? Hey there. So Divya, I hope I pronounced your name right, from India. Welcome. That's so exciting. Welcome. Um, Divya, so you work with children. Awesome. That's awesome. Um, so I think there are some basic principles that we tend to find when we're working with children and adolescents, even adults, to be honest. I was thinking about this because I was thinking most of us use an integrated approach. And to me, theory drives application. So if I'm using an integrated approach, how do I fit all those pieces together? And that's kind of what I was pondering for a while there. And I love using neuroscience because I think it helps to understand behavior, where behavior is coming from. If we understand the mind is the boss of the body, especially for children with emotion regulation problems, it really helps us to understand what's going on with that. But it's not always biological, so to speak. Sometimes it's environmental, and I find a lot of times it's both if they're coming to my office. So when I thought about using an integrated approach with play therapy and expressive arts, and I thought, well, theory drives application. How can I make sure what I'm doing is grounded in theory and research? Because to me, that's how, as mental health professionals, we make sure that we're using best practice with our clients and not going kind of off the rails, so to speak, and doing at best, we'll be kind of mediocre, I think. And at worst, we might actually do harm. So in my mind, if we're grounded in theory and research and using best practice, then we kind of have our feet on the ground, so to speak, helping to navigate the nuances of working with our child and adolescent clients, because they can't always tell us what's going on. So when I thought about it, there were certain things that were kind of universal across all the play therapy models in one way or another. And those were two things. One is that we create a safe space for the therapeutic relationship to occur. And that takes time, and it varies depending on the client, because sometimes you have children and adolescents who come in right away, they're ready to go, get going. Sometimes we have more cautious children and adolescents, and it takes them a little bit more time to engage. And I always think it's important to think about the parents as well, because we want to engage the parents or the caregivers in the change process as well. So we need to establish safety and security for parents or caregivers as well. And if we decide we want to integrate the whole family and when we do some family play therapy sessions, then we need to make sure that we're creating that safe space for everybody, which, individuals will engage at their own pace. And even in a family, you have all different kind of personalities. So making sure first and foremost, we create that safe space, because we know from neuroscience that in order for, so the neuroception circuits always on alert for danger, and our social engagement circuits don't engage until threat is determined that it does not exist. So the neuroception circuits have to disengage because no danger is found, so to speak. And then we engage our social engagement circuits. And in order for children to engage in play and really access, and adolescents, I would say, and to be honest, I would say adults as well, in order for them to really engage in the play therapy or the expressive arts. And I'm sure you find this, Anna, when your clients are fully engaged in the art making process, they are letting their guard down. They are going to those deeper levels, but they won't do that until they feel safe. So safety first and foremost in the therapeutic space. And then the other thing is that we have to tune in to our clients, and that's going to help us figure out what's going on with them in the play therapy process. And as we're figuring out what's going on with them, because we're tuned in, that's going to help us figure out what kind of strategies that we need to use. So Daniel Siegel would call those our resonant circuits, where we're kind of tuned in mind to mind. We want parents to do that with their kids. And in the therapy process, I think we need to be able to tune in with parents to help them engage and to help understand what's going on with them, so that we can help them to do that with their child and read their child's cues. My mouth's not working. So that to me is first and foremost across all of the different types of modalities. So then if we want to use a neuroscience, I like using a neuroscience and attachment lens, because I think it gives us really good information, especially for children with emotion regulation problems. Because their parents need, the children and the parents, they need us to tune in and figure out what's going on. They don't know. They're overwhelmed. The child is feeling bad. They feel like they're a bad kid because they're having these meltdowns, or they feel like something's wrong with them because they get locked up and frozen with anxiety, or they're having anger outbursts, or they kind of shut down. And grown-ups are looking at them like, what's wrong? Like, and the more questions grown-ups ask, what's wrong, the more anxious or upset or withdrawn or dysregulated that can cause for the child. So they're coming to us because they need us to help them figure out what's going on. And so we need to create that sense of safety. And then we need to use that good clinical decision making to figure out what is activating those emotions. And that's a lot for me where the curiosity comes in. What's going on? And in order to do that, we need parents engaged, because we need information from them. And that's part of the decision-making process as well. How are we going to integrate parents in? What is that going to look like? And then how do we structure? That's part of the structuring of how are we going to structure the sessions? Who's going to be involved in the sessions? How are we going to integrate parents in the sessions? What interventions are we going to use? And are those being effective? So if we're tuned in, then we'll be able to tell how things are working, as well as if we have parents involved, and we can elicit feedback from clients too. I like to check in a lot with clients because that's where I get some of my information as well. So let's take a case example, because I thought that would be useful. How does the CAPES model, how can that work with a real life client situation? So the case example I'm going to use is based on a lot of years experience. And so it's not a real client that I'll be discussing. It's kind of a culmination of things that I found to be happening with kids who are coming in. So let's say we have a 6-year-old client, and she is aggressive towards others in the school. The school's calling mom all the time that her daughter is getting in trouble at school. She's having meltdowns. When the kids are going out for recess, she gets in pushing matches in the hallway, or she gets out onto the playground and she shoves the kids out there. Or at home, she just has these horrendous meltdowns that can last like an hour or longer. And mom gets overwhelmed because she doesn't know what to do. And the child doesn't know how to articulate. She just knows she's not happy and she's mad. And so she acts out. And she doesn't have the ability to tell mom what is going on. And so mom is a single mom. She's exhausted. She's overwhelmed. She doesn't know what to do or how to co-regulate her daughter's strong emotions. And because she's exhausted and she's a single mom, and mom's own family history, there's a family history of addiction and trauma in mom's family history. So sometimes the daughter's emotion dysregulation taps into some of her previous attachment wounds and kind of shuts mom down. Plus, mom's working and she's overwhelmed. She's tired of getting the phone calls. She feels like a failure. She just gives in because she doesn't know what to do sometimes. The dad is absent, hasn't been involved in the child's life since she was like 1. And mom doesn't know where he is, and he doesn't help out with child support. And mom has a few resources for support with childcare and things like that, but not a lot of support in that way. So how do we use CAPES in this situation? Just going to check in, see who else is here. So we have John. Hey, John, how are you? John, feel free to, where are you from? Do you work with kids and adolescents? I think one of the things about children and adolescents, if you work with them in the psychotherapy realm, mental health, you have kids and teenagers on your caseload who struggle with emotion regulation. This is one of the most common presenting issues that I found for parents and caregivers bringing their children to the therapy process. And so that's actually one of the reasons why I actually developed a training, which I have coming up February 5th. It's an online training and it's using CAPES and attachment and neuroscience lens with children with emotion regulation problems, because I found this was happening so many times, and the people that I supervise weren't quite sure how to help these clients. So I've done a lot of supervision over the years, and emotion regulation is one of the most common and often overwhelms therapists as well, because they're not always sure what to do. And parents are looking at them like, what are you going to do? So I developed a training, which is coming up next Saturday, February 5th. And we'll talk about the neuroscience of emotion regulation and attachment, and looking for different mental health factors that may play into it, because I think that's the other thing. So when we get to curiosity, then we're looking at, so for this little 6-year-old, what's going on? I'm going to be curious. When I meet with mom, I'm going to be curious because mom is feeling like a failure. And I think the thing we want to keep in mind when we're meeting with parents is if they're bringing their child, they already feel like a failure. And even if you don't see them as a failure, they're convinced you as a therapist see them as a failure, doing a bad job. So I try to use a lot of curiosity in my voice tone. Like, I'm curious. Have you noticed what activates daughter's emotion regulation? Does it happen at home? Is it the same at school? So when I'm gathering information and I'm working with her. So I'm using curiosity, I'm also using curiosity. Where does this behavior happen? What activates it? I like to use the analogy of Columbo. I don't know. Do you guys remember? Maybe you've seen some of the reruns. If you're my generation, you might have watched Columbo when you were growing up. He's this unassuming detective, and he just is, just curious. And he'll ask questions using curiosity to explore things. And that's how he ends up finding the murderer who he needs to arrest. So curiosity, if I'm working with adolescents or like a 10-year-old and we're exploring what's going on, if we're using a CBT because they have anxiety and I want to explore what are those emotion regulation, the negative self-talk that's activating those, or what are the fear thoughts, I may use a curious tone of, oh, I'm curious what what are your fears? What do you worry about? So what's the bad thing you think will happen if such and such happens? And if we're processing their Santre or art, I may ask a curious question, it's staying in the metaphor of, oh, I'm curious if they've named a tiger in their drawing. I may use curiosity with a little bit of narrative therapy to give some voice to the characters they've drawn. I'm curious what the tiger would like to say. I'm curious what the tiger thinks of, maybe there's a bear trying to take away its food. Curious what the tiger thinks of the bear trying to take its food. And in that way, I can get a sense of their thought processes and things like that. So if I'm using, in this case example, if I'm using attunement and authenticity in the play therapy sessions, or in the sessions where they're using art, I'm tuned in, kind of tuning in my resonance circuits to pick up what's going on. If they're fully engaged in the art making process, that lets me know they feel safe in there, because in the beginning, they'll usually be a little more superficial. And as they begin to engage more in the change process, you can see them feel more comfortable. They'll increase their vulnerability. They may sit closer to you, or I've had little boys in the beginning in play therapy would sit on the other side of the room, turn their back to me, and not let me play with them until eventually they would, allow me to get it closer, and they would even allow me to track if I'm using child-centered play therapy, because sometimes they wouldn't do that. And I'm being authentic. I learned a long time ago, I'm kind of a nerdy person. I like to laugh and have fun. If I was going to make it in this field, then I needed to be my authentic self with professional boundaries. So I can show up authentically as me. I don't want to be somebody that I'm not. I learned a long time ago working with adolescents, they can pick up, even kids can, but they'll pick up and you'll lose trust with them. If I try to be like Joe Cool, that I'm not, I'm nerdy. I've always told my kids, I make nerdy cool. and then they roll their eyes and walk away. And when I work with adolescents, I'll say the same thing, and then I laugh, and they can't help but laugh because I find myself hysterical. But that's me. So that's me authentically. But if that's not you, and maybe you're a quieter person, or you have to authentically be you in the relationship, because that earns trust as well. And I think that comes with experience, knowing how to navigate that authenticity in the play therapy and expressive arts room. And I do think that's important, um, using that authenticity and the attunement. The attunement helps us to tune in, like with this little girl. One of the things that maybe she has a developmental delay because I notice the way in which she's engaging with me or with her mother, and or mother describes how she's playing with children, not necessarily developmentally where that play would be or those interactions. So I may consider the possibility of maybe being on the autism spectrum. I may explore the possibility of how are they engaging with me in the session? What am I seeing in the themes in the play? Are those typical age appropriate play themes? Or maybe there's a lot of aggression in the play, and maybe it's more about the little girl not having access to father, or there being some generational patterns of attachment issues. So maybe early on, there were some attachment ruptures that never really got repaired, and maybe I need to work with mom on helping to co-regulate her 6-year-old, and not mom managing her own trauma triggers while she's helping her child to regulate her strong emotions and use that attachment relationship to be attuned. Maybe I want to find out what's going on in school because maybe she's in first grade and it's been the pandemic, so she didn't go to kindergarten, and maybe she's got some delays that way because kindergarten was online, which is, that just seems hard to me. So I'll be tuning in to use my curiosity to see what's going on. I'll be tuned in to see what's going on in the playroom and in the behaviors in the playroom, the interactions with me. I'll be doing that with mom, and I'll be doing it while I'm authentically engaged. And the other is when we're using play therapy and expressive arts, we want to tap into those therapeutic powers of play. So the therapeutic powers of play for connection, because children connect through playing. And even adolescents, they tend to do better with a playful attitude because, again, the social engagement circuits can only have to be engaged in order for playfulness to occur, because otherwise we're on alert. So if I can be playful even with adolescents, I know their social engagement circuits have activated, and I can tap into art and play for self-expression. We can explore what their negative self-talk is, negative core beliefs. For children, they explore their world through play. So I can see how they are experiencing their world. I can see what's going on with some of those aggressive feelings, because in the playroom, you can use aggression in the playroom with boundaries. So I can see what's going on with that. So we tune into those therapeutic powers of play to help children engage in the change process. And we can help parents use and access those therapeutic powers of play with their children in order to strengthen that attachment relationship. Excuse me. And then environmental context. I'm gonna have to, got a little tickle in my throat. So we want to tap into figuring out what's going on in the environment. So for this little girl, what triggers her at school? Is she struggling academically and she is feeling bad about herself because she can't do anything? So her way of managing that is to be oppositional and defiant, or maybe she gets overwhelmed by all the sensory stuff in the school, like lunchroom for sensory processing. Kids with sensory processing problems can be torture. Um, Transitions can be hard for some kids. So I want to explore what's going on, what triggers, when it gets triggered, because that's going to help me figure out what's going on. And that's going to help me figure out what interventions I need to use. And then finally and that includes checking in with parents, um, to see how parents are doing, because we want to check in with them about parenting. We still want to use that attunement and authenticity and curiosity to maintain rapport with them, to find out, are there ways in which we can help parents be more effective, um, to use some of that co-regulation with their child. We may want to even use parents as skill coaches if we're doing some more directive play therapy things with our client. We may want to bring parents in, which brings us to structuring. So let's say with this child, so with structuring, I'm going to figure out, how do I want mom to be involved? Well, in this situation, let's say I've decided I really need to help strengthen that attachment with mom, with her 6-year-old, because they're not doing the attachment repairs. And those ruptures are happening multiple times a day at school. Mom's overwhelmed, she's working. So I may want to have parent child, and I may use an attachment approach like some of the Theraplay strategies, or I may want to use filial therapy. So I'll work on helping mom understand attachment. I may do some psychoeducation around. I wrote a book called Attachment Focused Family Play Therapy and Intervention for Children and Adolescents After Trauma. If you're interested in that book, I'll post a link in the comment. It's through Routledge, so you can go on their website as well. But in there, I thought, created like an attachment-based parenting model to teach parents so that they can use the therapeutic powers of play. So I will probably go over family space and the 3 R's of relationship, and help mom understand about co-regulation and helping her be aware of what's going on with her. And we may use some attachment-based play therapy activities in the session. And then I may also do some parent coaching without the child, to help mom work on some of those parenting skills, using an attachment-based model. So I'm going to think about that in the structuring. How do I want to set that up? How am I going to meet and do the attachment-based sessions every week? Or am I going to do those one week and alternate a parent coaching another week? Because I have to keep in mind, I don't want to overwhelm mom. Or I may decide that I need to use child-centered play therapy with this child first, so I can get a sense of the child and what's going on with the child. So all of these things, I'm thinking about what intervention I need to use to target the emotion regulation, and figure out what are the roots of that emotion regulation, what interventions I'm going to use, the pacing. I want to make sure that I don't go too fast with the change process, even with mom, that I overwhelm, but I don't want to go too slow either. And in the sessions, how am I pacing the sessions so that I don't overwhelm my clients? So if I'm doing directive play therapy or directive art, I want to pace. If I have a really kind of cautious child, then I want to make sure I go at their pace, because if I go too fast and they get overwhelmed, the likelihood they will withdraw and go internal will be high, and then they won't trust me. I'll lose trust. So I want to think about the structuring as well. So that's the CAPES model. And just as a recap, most of the play therapy and expressive arts modalities have two basic principles. One is establish safety and security, and then the other is, how am I tuning in during the sessions to figure out what's going on with my client, and then what's based on that theory model, what's the way in which we address that problem. And depending on the theory model, the application will maybe look different. And then children struggle with feeling like bad kids. Their self-esteem takes a hit. Their parents are overwhelmed. So using some kind of structure to help me integrate my different interventions and grounding those in neuroscience and attachment, that will help me figure out what model what intervention I want to use. Like if I want to use a parent-child session and make it attachment-based, or maybe I'm teaching directive skills using CBT, and I want to bring the parents in as skills coaches at the end, and we talk about homework and what that's going to look like, because parents are really important to help. They're the therapeutic agents of change. And then, so to me, the CAPES framework really helped to bring all those together using a neuroscience and attachment lens as it relates to emotion regulation. And so when I was thinking about what type of intervention I could use these principles of curiosity, attunement, and authenticity, using the therapeutic powers of play, looking at the child within context to understand more broadly what is going on. And then the structuring piece, how am I going to structure this treatment process, session by session, as well as from beginning to end, and who's going to be involved in the treatment process. So that is it for today. Oops, let me take my little banner down here. If you're interested, I do have a training coming up on February 5th. We go over a lot of the neuroscience and attachment of emotion regulation, things to look for, some of the mental health things, some of the mental health challenges that you may find with children struggling with emotion regulation. So it helps you figure out what are the roots. And then we talk about how to use the CAPES model, we'll do some interventions using play therapy and expressive arts that you can use right away with your clients. We'll talk about the importance of integrating parents as co-regulators or skills coaches, and how are you going to integrate parents in there. So that training is coming up. If you're interested, you can go to my website, which is rrhcounseling.com/courses. I'm only doing the online version at this point due to COVID concerns. So that one is available. If you're interested, you can sign up for that one, and I will see you next week.